Welcome back to the Right Audio community. My name is John, and for this video, we will take a look at McIntosh's new flagship AV processor, the MX180, just announced this month. Now, if you've been following this channel and you watched the last video, we were looking at the Right Audio news and how slow it has been for the new flagships to come out, and just about the same time McIntosh announces this flagship, which answers the question when McIntosh will have its successor or upgrade to the MX170. Now let's take a look at the details to see if this is living up to our expectation of what the flagship should be in 2022. And we'll compare it against the 170 as well as the Lyngdorf MP-60, which this unit is derived from, as well as the 170 is derived from, and the Marantz AV8805, and the other models within the McIntosh lineup. So let's take a look. Now first, the MX170. Of course, like all McIntosh products, they have the classic look, with the glass front, the traditional knobs, fluorescent as display, and so this is what we've come to expect from the quality and appearance. You buy a McIntosh component 2 decades ago and you buy one now, they fit together, they nest together, they look good together. And yeah, certainly something that captures your attention when you walk in a room and one of these units is there. So the 170 sold for $15,500. It was a 16-channel processor and was released in 2019. So here we are in 2022 with the MX180 to replace it, and it looks very similar. And it's announced as an 8K, HDMI 2.1 capable processor, and we'll get into all those details. But we're looking at the cosmetics here and just some of the things that you see on the surface. And the best way to do this is to look at them side by side. The 170 from 2019 versus the 180 from 2022 this February. And they look the same. All the knobs and displays and everything are put in the same position. So this looks really similar, although if we look a little more carefully, some subtle differences on the labels. The labels on the bottom left, the bottom right have more of a gold color than the white color, and the Dolby Atmos logo has been updated to the revision there. But otherwise, these look the same. Of course, the default display on this goes from 4K to 8K, as we see in these sample images from McIntosh. But what you see right away, and the details I've written below it, is the price difference. $15,500 was an expensive unit in 2019 when the 170 was released. Now we have the 180 at $17,000. So they've gone up $1,500 US for cosmetically looking the same. But are those differences in the details that justify the $1,500 increase? Let's take a look even further. If we spin these around and look at the back, they look very similar on the back. We see the power switch on there with the red outline on that, which is emblematical of what Lyngdorf does on their product. So we might assume that this is also a Lyngdorf derived unit, and it's fairly close. But if you scan this back and forth, you look at all the outputs and all the inputs, you do see some differences. The number of HDMI ports has decreased, so we lose 3 inputs and 2 outputs on the HDMI section. The other thing that they've dropped from this 180 model are the HD base T connections. Now, if you're not familiar with those, that is for video transmission. That gives you longer distances for your projector. Uses standard HD base T devices to convert it back when you get to the projector. The other thing that they've dropped is the second output for the network. We'll get into what the impact on that is later, but there are some things that have dropped, and I don't see any ports that have been added from the back of this. So some differences there. So not yet something to justify the $1,500 price increase. In fact, now we're concerned that they're actually taking things off. Other models in the McIntosh lineup are the MX123, which is the next model down. This is considerably less money. This is $8,000. This was announced in 2021. So this is available in 2021. I think actually they announced it in 2020, and it shows that McIntosh has been pretty active, maybe compared to some of its peers, in creating new models recently. And so that's the 123. The difference here, this one's based off of Marantz designs. And then we have the MX100, which I'm not sure what the basis of this design is, although yeah, sometimes I think it's based a little bit on Marantz, sometimes I think it's based on a little more on Lyngdorf, or it could be some of their own technology. I don't know for sure, but if you know out there in the community a little more details on the MX100 entry-level processor, this is a 100% digital unit for $5,000 and only 13 channels there. So looking at the McIntosh lineup side by side, including the 170, which I believe is still available on their website, even though the 180 has come out, you can see how this scales from $5,000, the $5,000 MX100, up to the new MX180 at $17,000. So we go from a 13-channel unit to a 15-channel to the 16-channel flagships. So yes, this is what they look like side by side. Obviously, the 123 is cosmetically very similar to the 170, 180, but the knobs are a little bit different. Physically, the size is about the same. You can see on the 123 the antennas sticking out. No antennas on the other models. Now let's look at it compared to the derived units, the units that they're derived from, right? So the Lyngdorf MP-60 2.1 appears to be the unit that the 180 is and the 170 of that, for that matter, are derived from. Do look quite a bit different physically, not as tall on the Lyngdorf, not as many outputs. We'll get more into that. It's hard to get interior photos of these. In fact, the Lyngdorf one is even a MP-50, a generation behind. Maybe give you some indication what that looks inside. Yeah, and then on the MX123, you can see that this is derived from the Marantz, but cosmetically different. So even with being derived by third-party products, they do give it the McIntosh signature look and style. And unless you knew otherwise, you would think these were fully McIntosh designed through and through. So let's get into the details here, starting with our typical summary of the channels. And so the MX100 starts with a 7.2.4 configuration. The MX123 and the Marantz AV8805A, have the same channel configuration. So there's a little bit of flexibility with those. It's either 7.2.6, or if you want to go with some front wides, you can bring that up to a 9.2.4, sacrificing a couple of the ceiling channels, which is my preferred configuration. I'd rather have the front wide in that front stage if your room allows for it, and I think 4 on the ceiling is often adequate, but every room is different and you might prefer the other, so it's nice to have that flexibility. On the flagship side, so we have the Lyngdorf MP-60, the MX170, and the MX180. These are even more flexible in their configuration. So it starts with 7.1.4 configuration, but there's 4 auxiliary outputs, which we can configure for subwoofer, for other usage. So this could bring it to a 9.5.2 configuration, if you wanted to have more subwoofers and less ceiling channels. So I think a healthy balance is still in between there. I'd probably balance those out to, if we've got 16 channels, I would be 9.4 plus 2 or 3 subwoofers. It could be a 9.3.4 configuration with more subwoofers, or I would do a 9.2.5, and the 5th one could be for those oral 3D configurations where they want that voice of God channel right above the main listening position. So lots of flexibility on those speakers. So one thing that you will notice here is going from the MX170 to the 180, you pick up DTS:X Pro, which the Lyngdorf MP-60 2.1 has. So that makes all the products now within the McIntosh range having support for DTS:X Pro. In fact, right through the whole line, you've got Dolby Atmos, DTS:X, DTS:X Pro, and Aural 3D support for everything except what we believe to be outgoing MX170. So nice to see there. Now, the other thing that McIntosh is consistent on is no earphone jack on these units and no AM/FM tuner, which I like to see both. Well, I know some of you have put some comments in there that, why are you so hung up on earphone jacks? For critical listening, you'll want to have a dedicated headphone amp. I agree. But I like it for troubleshooting. That's why I want that right on the thing so I can plug in. And if something's not coming through my speakers, I can test it right there at the processor. That's my use case for that front jack. But, not all the normal things here. We'll get into the wireless capabilities later. But they all have removable power cords, as you would expect, and so forth. And of course, if you wanted the tuner and your headphone jacks, well, as we said in a prior video, and by the way, this video does supersede all the other McIntosh videos we've done in the past. So this is the third one that we've done in the last year and a half. But we've pulled this out before, so you could spend a lot of money if you really wanted to have an external tuner and an external headphone amplifier from McIntosh. That choice is yours, but you're really increasing the cost of your investment. Looking at some format supports here, IMAX Enhance only comes with the Marantz derived product, the MX123. So if that's important to you, you might do better going with the lower cost unit because the flagships don't have it. They do have Dolby Vision. They do have a room perfect room calibration, which is thought of to be superior or far superior to the Odyssey calibration that is in the MX123 and Marantz products, as well as the MX100. And of course, Odyssey is often criticized as not being at a top tier room calibration, although they've made some recent improvements. None of these are THX certified, as we only see those on Onkyo and Integra products. The DACs we don't know a lot about what's in here, but we do know what McIntosh publishes for output specifications, and across the board they're claiming 96 dB signal to noise ratio and a 0.005 total harmonic distortion. This is interesting, particularly because it's lower than the Marantz's published AV8805 specification of 102 decibels. Given that, we kind of want to have an independent reviewer with good test equipment and procedures to kind of compare these. So Audio Science Review, that's a good source to see at least whether you agree or not agree with their methodology. You at least get a common comparison. I believe he is very consistent in the way he executes the test. So I'd be interested to see both the Marantz, which I think he has, with McIntosh, which I'm not sure he's tested McIntosh, but that would be an interesting comparison. On the PCM side, they're all 24-bit, 192 hertz. On that, DSD is not advertised within McIntosh, and except for the 123, which is based off Marantz. So Marantz and McIntosh 123 have the DSD support clearly specified. So I'm not expecting DSD support with these flagships. So that's a concern. Looking at the I/O, here is, we've seen the drop in the HDMI support, now 5 in, 2 out, which matches the Lyngdorf product. So that's a drop from the 170. They all have 3 coaxial in, 1 out, 4 optical on the McIntosh, except when you get into the 123, when it matches the Marantz AV8805, as well as the MX100. So 2 and 2 on the lower tier products, and 3 and 4 inputs on the flagships, plus you get that output coaxial, which is nice to have. The other thing that the flagships give you, which matches the Lyngdorf, is the AES EBU, for those of you that want to leverage that interface. And the pre-inputs, they're all balanced here. You get 2 channels of balanced inputs, and then you only get 1 with the 123. So there is a difference as well. As far as balanced outputs, the McIntosh always gives you balanced outputs for all these models, albeit the MX123 doesn't give you as many balanced as unbalanced outputs, which I think is a mistake. I think they should have gone the full balanced on all those outputs, but that differentiates it from the higher tier. Now, while the flagships do give you a 7.1 multi-channel input unbalanced, it's not giving you any unbalanced multi-channel output. So everything comes out as balanced, unlike the MX123, which is a 15.2 unbalanced on the outputs. You still get analog input choices, 4 in, 1 out for the external zones, but you're not getting any component or composite video on the flagships, unlike the MX123. They all have moving magnet phono inputs, except for the MX100, and Lyngdorf is not one to put that on their product as well. I'm wondering, at this caliber, why didn't they do moving coil on there? To put such a convenience item on a $17,000 unit and not including moving coil at that price point, I think is interesting. And then we'll look at the triggers later. Spinning these around, you can kind of see how these are set up with the balanced outputs, the 4 auxiliary on the flagship models, and a maximum of only 2 subwoofer outputs on the lower tier. Looking at video a little more carefully, we see that the new 180 is the enhancement is adding 8K capability, the HDMI 2.1 support for all channels. That's 5 in, 2 out, which you did not have on the 170. On the MX123, you only got one input that was 8K capable and 2 outputs, and this matches the Marantz situation. Now, what I'm curious about is Marantz has this adapter box, the VS3003, which splits one of those inputs into 3 channels. So it increases you to have up to 3 2.1 HDMI inputs, and whether the MX123 can also work with that adapter, it's unclear because McIntosh is not making any statements around that. Nor are they saying that the MX170 is upgradable to 2.1 in any way or any of the prior generations. So at this point, we can assume you have to buy one of the newer models to get 8K support. But it's nice to know at the 180, you got full channels at HDMI 2.1. So that gives you 4K at 120 Hertz and 8K at 60 Hertz on those. The new model has support for both HDR10 and HDR10 Plus, which the 170 did not support HDR10 Plus, but the other models do, except for the MX100 at the entry level. For all the 2.1 features like variable refresh rate and quick media switching and the auto low latency mode, it has those features. So that's what you get with the 180 and the MX123. They're all moved to HDCP 2.3. All models have the Dolby Vision. They don't have IMAX, as we said before, unless you go to the MX123. Hybrid log gamma and Rec 2020 are there. We got to assume that the MP-60 also supports Rec 2020 as well as the AV8805 from Marantz, but they don't call that out in their literature. Please advertise everything that you support. So yeah, you get a lot better video with the 180 over the 170, so a clear advantage there for your extra $1,500. Looking at the networking, here's another loss. The 170 had an additional LAN port, so you could put another device on it. Essentially a 2-port, a switch, basically splitter, an Ethernet splitter switch on the back of it. Now this could be easily accomplished by an off-board Ethernet switch. I really don't think you need, it's a convenience item, I don't think you really need it there. It's cheap enough to add that, so I don't think that is a big loss. But in traditional McIntosh fashion, there's no wireless support on the Flagship, nor is there on the MX100. We only get it with the MX123 on the wireless Bluetooth and Wi-Fi support. When it comes to control, it can be done through Ethernet, it can be done through infrared, it can be done through RS-232 port. It's got this traditional 4 in, 4 out on the triggers. So that is on the same as the other Flagships. Only 2 out on the MX123 and Marantz models. They're not claiming support other than Control 4, although we wonder if the other control systems probably have the integration figured out. So you could check that out on those web pages. Streaming ecosystems. So we have a big question mark against McIntosh. One might assume, as we do, that they would support all the ecosystems that Lyngdorf has on the 170 and 180, but there's no mention on their website, on their data sheets, or their manual that any of this is supported. And I think previously I had reported it did with that assumption in mind, but I'm backing off unless one of you can come forward and say these are supported by these McIntosh models. Otherwise, you're going to the MX123, which inherits the features that Marantz has. We're not sure if the McIntosh MX123 inherits all the HEOS features that comes from Marantz. There's no mention on the MX100 as well. So when it comes to internet streaming, we don't know. We assume that the Lyngdorf MP-60 sets it up for Spotify and vTuner support, or are those not present? Because the manual mentions nothing of them. And we are still making a guess on the MX23. We could probably turn those all to question marks as well here, because there's no mention of them. Now, our feeling is you really don't need this in your processor. You can handle this with an external box, and maybe that's what McIntosh is saying. So why keep up with this all internally in your processor when it can be done externally? When it comes to the remote, McIntosh has adopted the HR085 for the MX180, which is the same one that they use on the other processors, except for the MX123, which is essentially a copy with McIntosh labeling of the Marantz remote. Dimensions-wise, this is the same dimensions and weight as the outgoing MX170. We do now know, thanks for one of our comments in from a prior video, that McIntosh does indeed have a 100-watt power consumption. I'm not sure if I missed it or they just updated their manuals, but thank you for that comment coming in, that it's 100 watts. The MX123 is 75 watts, and the MX100 is a 30-watt consumption. But this still stands at the same weight of 30 pounds, 13.6 kilograms as the MX170 on the MX180. The MX123 is interestingly a little heavier at 31 pounds, 14 kilograms. So it, very similar, chassis size and weight for all these McIntosh models, except for the MX100, which is significantly smaller and lighter. Looking at the user interfaces, the 180, the 170, and the Lyngdorf all share the same user interface for setup and configuration, including parametric equalization curves. Although I feel that the Lyngdorf manual gets into more details there, the Lyngdorf might actually have some more features around setting some of those curves, etc. The MX123 clearly adopts the Marantz user interface with a little adoption of cosmetics for branding on the McIntosh version. The MX100 is clearly different, although it does have the Odyssey support as the MX123. After you get this set up, you start to use this, there are apps. The MX180 is all 100% web page or app based, and there's no on-screen display version of that. So the McIntosh does have their own branded apps as well. So those, I believe, work as well with the 180 as the 170. I don't see anything that says otherwise at the moment. And then Marantz has their own as well. So I think from the playback standpoint, each of these brands, Lyngdorf, Marantz, and McIntosh, all have their own apps for the playback purposes. So that kind of wraps it up. What are your thoughts on the new MX180? Does it justify the $1,500 increase? For largely what you get is HDMI 2.1 support with 8K 60, 4K 120 support. It gets you DTSX Pro. Those are the major enhancements around this, but it drops some of the HDMI ports, and it drops the Net 2 and the long distance projector LAN transmission. So are those losses okay? Do you think that the price adder of $1,500 for the 2.1 and the DTSX support justified? Are they taking additional profits? Is this part of the supply chain problems that we've mentioned out there? Your thoughts on this topic would be useful to the Ripewave audio community. You know, my thought is it's that MX1, if it wasn't for the Odyssey, which isn't terrible, but not as good as the Lyngdorf, I'd almost prefer that over the 180 from a feature point of view. But do you get that much more quality and sound output for more than double the cost? That feedback would be useful. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and be sure to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.